Anyway, so hello, nice to meet everybody. I am Martina Davis. I am a division manager with our citywide planning group. I've been with the city for 17 years, actually. For the past few years, one of my primary jobs has been tracking, working with Sacramento as much as we can, addressing and kind of implementing these state laws as they come. So I've got some pretty good expertise on that. And I'll just jump right in. So I'll go through a little bit of background, just really quick, I promise. Talk about some of the key themes, like we've seen what is the problem Sacramento's trying to solve. That kind of helps you as you're understanding like what is happening to us, to think about what the problem they're trying to solve is. I'll highlight specifics, right? That's the key thing here. And then talk a little bit about how we're addressing this, the kind of new world of planning. So just really quickly, not belaboring this, but the idea that the state does regulate planning and how we plan for housing in particular, this isn't new. These laws have been on the books for some time, most of them. And so what the state has done recently, though, is taken these laws, the Permit Streamlining Act, the Housing Accountability Act, the Density Bonus, and saying, look, we've had this on the books since the 70s and we're still not producing enough housing. So we got to crank these up. We're going to crank these up to like level 11. And that's mostly what these newer state laws are doing. They're also introduced a new act. I'll talk about that with SB 330. Again, not belaboring this, but I do think it's remiss to not just kind of touch on the reason, the crisis that we're in. So I think these stats really kind of speak for themselves. I guess the one I'll call out, it would take 3 adults working full-time minimum wage to afford an average 1-bedroom apartment in San Jose, right? So there is a great need. Sacramento didn't wake up and just say, I'm going to do this to mess with Martina Davis. There is a need for this. And they're going about it the way they're going about it. So kind of what do we hear when I talk to Sacramento, when we kind of hear things, we shop things around, what's the sentiment we're getting back? Generally speaking, a lot of the sentiment is that cities are reluctant to plan for housing. So the state needs to push us. That where cities do plan for housing, we're still reluctant to approve it. So the state needs to push us on that. That cities are using our authority inappropriately. So where we're given authority to regulate land use, we are abusing it. So that's a kind of a sentiment we're hearing a lot, or kind of a feeling around, and that it's just really, we're in such a crisis that this can't be left up to local governments. Land use planning has historically been left up to local governments, and the state is now making findings with these laws saying this is a matter of statewide concern because we're at a crisis at a statewide level.
And Martina, it's fair to say the state's actions have been really focused at cities that did not produce housing versus cities like San Jose that built the lion's share of housing in the area.
Yeah, that would definitely be fair to say. I'm in contact with a good number of the offices, right, who are sponsoring this legislation. And what you'll hear from them a lot is like, well, no, I'm not writing this for you, because we know San Jose is doing your part, but this is really for your neighbors, who we know aren't doing your part. And it's like, I appreciate that. And it does give us, I think, a lot more leeway as we talk to the legislators about the impact on this legislation on us, because they do recognize us as a good actor, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't affect us all, this legislation. I think the analogy I give is from my childhood is like, my brother didn't get his homework done. Sometimes my mom would get mad and unplug the TV, and then I couldn't watch TV either, right? So it feels like that, that I was a good kid. I did my homework, doesn't matter. Mom got mad and unplugged the TV. So none of us have TV now. I'm not gonna belabor this, but I just think this is really telling out of the sentiment we're getting out of the Department of Housing and Community Development that oversees and regulates a lot of this stuff. They're saying that regulations that were well-intentioned and abstract can be used as barriers. And what I think is most telling on this one is kind of what they're calling out, for examples, endangered species protections, right? Don't walk away from this thinking they're like rolling back those protections, but it just goes to show the level of scrutiny we're under on anything we do. Even good actor cities like us, it's just the presumption is if someone's complaining about what the city's doing, they're probably wrong. Chances are, yeah, they're just using this to try to stop housing. I got to figure out what they're up to. So it can be quite frustrating for those of us who really, we are trying our best. So what I'll do is I'm going to talk about kind of a lot of these key provisions in context of these themes that we're seeing. So there's the 3 Ps of housing policy, which the city ascribes to. It's preservation of existing units. I don't want to go backwards. Protection for existing residences, and then production of new housing. And production is really where we're seeing and planning the impact of these new bills. So let's just go through them and I'll talk about some specifics. So first area I would say I would categorize is making more land available for housing. They haven't done a ton of this really, you know, where I think they focused more before was around single family properties. Like, hey, California has a lot of single family properties. San Jose, that's our single largest land use. If we can unlock the potential single family properties, we can really unlock a lot of land for housing. ADUs is a great example. Those have proved to be actually quite popular, and they are one of our more steady housing production numbers. People are building ADUs for a lot of reasons. A lot of them don't go on the market. They may be used for a grandparent or a parent or a child, but it is still housing units. So that's been a huge success. So much so that Sacramento adopted SB 9 and said, well, that worked. Let's double down on it. And what SB 9 allows is duplexes with ADUs. So you could do a duplex and 2 ADUs, so 4 units. Or you could split the lot and build either a single family house or a duplex on both of the new lots. I know there was a ton of concern when this was adopted. It became effective in the beginning of 2022. I think a lot of people were afraid that, you know, our neighborhoods were just going to change drastically. And we just haven't seen that happen. And I can't say I'm surprised. I want to say it was the Turner Center did an economic analysis statewide, and they found that the economics of these types of projects don't work in most cases. So kind of no surprise that we're not seeing a lot. I don't have the numbers offhand, but I want to say it's no more than maybe a dozen and a half projects like citywide at this point. And we're not seeing a lot of the lot splits because you really do need a pretty big lot to start with. And most lots in San Jose just really aren't that big. If you only got 20 feet of your backyard, you like your backyard.
Hey, Martina, I thought when the city was considering opportunity housing, which is the same thing as SB 9, that the city's own report showed that Willow Glen was one of the places, though, that it would work in comparison to other parts of the city.
Yeah, so definitely there are certain markets where it would work better. And yeah, so I would say that who's going to see more of SB 9? I would say probably Willow Glen, West San Jose, where you are going to see it. Also Willow Glen with the lot splits, just given the kind of development patterns over the years, does tend to have kind of sometimes those like really deep lots that are particularly suitable for subdivision. So where these projects do make sense, I do think, yeah, we'll probably see them in your neighborhoods the most. You know, I think, and this is just my opinion, so it's really clear, this is my opinion. I do think that there is an idea up there in Sacramento that everybody who owns a house clearly wants to get more units out of their house. And the only thing stopping them is the city is in the way. And I think it's because they're hearing that from the advocates. They're, oh, you know, there's a grandma who could have built a duplex and she didn't because the city got, you know. And I think that's severely overblown. How many people really want to do that? People live in single family neighborhoods and properties because they like their backyard. They don't want to be a renter or a landlord, right? Not everyone wants to be a landlord. And so I don't know how much this will ever take off. We'll see. ADU started slow. We'll see where it goes. At the end of the day, homeowners have to want to do this to their properties, right? So there will always be, I think, a somewhat limited appetite for this, at least in the foreseeable future, in my opinion.
And Martina, just to let you know, because I know you're not focusing on specific projects, but we do have 3 in Willow Glen, and may not be using SB 9, might be using some of the other state laws, but one is to subdivide 1 lot into 5 on Camino and Camino Ramon and Britain. Another is on Lincoln, 1 lot into 5, and then on Franquette is 10 units for 1 house.
Yeah, so none of those would be SB 9 because SB 9 you're not going to be able to get more than two units, or excuse me, 2 lots out of it. So those would all be using either the city's existing policies, and then the one on Franquette is using the builder's remedy, which I will talk about. The other two, I just looked up builder's remedy and they weren't on the list. So I suspect those ones probably meet the city's policies already. So, you know, SB 10, that one did cause a lot of attention too. It was adopted at the same time as SB 9, but SB 10, just the key thing to know about SB 10 is it's an opt-in bill. It does not force cities to do anything. That's getting rarer and rarer. I think Sacramento's like, if we give you the option, you're still not doing it. But this is an example of where Sacramento said, okay, look, if you want to allow those bigger projects, kind of like the 5-10 units in single family neighborhoods, here's a streamlined path for you to adopt rules to do that. So it would take the city doing that, and it's not something that we've done, and it's not currently on our work plan. So
Martina, to be clear, SB 10 could be adopted by a future city council at any time because the state law allows it, making more of these projects viable.
yeah. Yeah, and you know, at any time, right, that we would have to amend the zoning ordinance, so there would have to obviously be outreach, and we'd have to get direction to do that, have the staffing to do it, whatnot. So it's not like they could at any Tuesday like pull a trigger and you know, SB 10's here. You would know if it was coming, but yeah, a future council could say, hey, you know what, we do want you to do that. But that would have to be direction from council. It's not something that we would be doing without that. So more recently, they said, okay, well, single family, all right, we did that. And we got to go more. It's not working. So let's start looking at our commercial and our institutional, so like church, school, that kind of stuff, land, which is of course a huge concern for the city because of our jobs housing imbalance, where we have more housing than jobs, which causes, you know, chronic fiscal issues around tax revenues being less for housing. And whatnot. So core tenets of our general plan are to preserve our employment land. And so Sacramento has started saying, well, housing's more important. I will talk about SB 10, 6, and maybe 2011 on the next slide. Another one, though, that is pending and we do expect to be signed, that's on the governor's desk, is SB 4. It would allow affordable housing projects on religious institution land or higher education land. So like, and it would have to be a nonprofit, I think, higher education institute. So a university could build housing on their land. This is generally aligned with direction we had gotten from the council to allow affordable housing projects on land that's being used for assembly and religious assembly in particular. So this one in a way actually kind of basically does something council told us to do, and we don't actually have to do the work for it. So we're watching to see, but we do expect that to get signed. SB 634 is another example that is also pending. It's not going this year. It's a 2-year cycle, so it either is adopted this year or next year. So this one would have to go next year. We are working closely with the author and the sponsor on this one. This is a bill that would allow non-congregate shelters, so like tiny home village type things, on underutilized land. Interestingly, it's land that has no demonstrable use in the next 5 years, but they don't want to define what that actually means. So we're trying to work with them to shape that into an opt-in bill. And so the city could, you know, if we wanted to do that, we could kind of shape what that looks like in our community instead of having the state just kind of throw it at us. So that's another one, just another example of what we need to start looking at other types of land. SB 6 AB 2011 caused a lot of splash when they were adopted. You know, I know for myself, my fellow planners, we were all like, where are we going to have shopping land at all? Where am I going to go shopping? Like, what? This is, oh my gosh, right? Housing on commercial land, like there goes our commercial land. I'll go right to the punchline. In our current market, we don't expect to see either of these bills used very much. And I'll tell you why. So just in general, they allow housing and mixed use projects on any land that is zoned for commercial uses. They do exclude industrial land and land that's next to industrial uses. That was actually an amendment we worked with them to add in there. They do provide, AB 2011 does provide streamlined ministerial approval. I'll talk about that in a minute. SB 6 doesn't by itself do that, but you can invoke the SB 35 to do streamline approval for that bill as well. So both of these bills could allow projects without the public hearing. Why we think they're going to be a challenge right now is both of them have a minimum density requirement of 30 units to acre. And you may be saying, well, how's that a problem, right? The more units they build, the more profit they get, right? It's kind of the opposite in our market. Anything above for sale townhomes in most markets does not pencil out. And that was kind of the models we looked at when the city was looking at our kind of opportunity housing, as the commissioner just mentioned. You know, we were looking at kind of for sale townhome type models, which is where we thought it would work. You can't build townhomes within under 30 units, or excuse me, over 30 units acre. It's just too dense. That's talking apartment buildings, condos, multi-story. And just in short, the construction costs, the labor, the lands don't justify the rents for building those kind of projects just about anywhere in the city right now. So interestingly, the minimum density requirement we think is going to be a constraint. If this allowed people to build for sale, like for townhomes or something like that, yeah, goodbye shopping centers. People would be just building that like crazy. But since it requires those higher density projects, those where they're already allowed can't pencil out.
So
Another,
Martina,
yeah,
in today's Mercury News, it was posted that prime retail commercial area across from Oak Ridge Mall, they're proposing putting wood townhouses to
yeah,
replace retail.
that's exactly
Do you so is that using SB6 and AB
no,
2011?
that is using builder's remedy.
Okay.
Yeah.
But there again, that's sort of hurting the city's economic base by eliminating sales tax.
Yep. Yeah. And,
Got it.
for us, like, we like this minimum density because it's like, look, if Sacramento is if we're going to be forced to lose this commercial land, we might as well get substantial housing out of it. And then the more people there, you can still support more retail in the area, et cetera. Right. So it's real heartburn to see that loss of economic base and that loss of land and that loss of if you're going to do housing, you need more units. But yeah, that one's not using these bills. So it's exactly what I said, right? If it could, I think we would see these bills used a lot more, other than the labor requirements as well. They both require prevailing wage, which tends to be a difficulty where you already can't pencil something out. Now you got to pay them even more. SB6 goes further. It requires skilled and trained workforce. So that means union labor. That's a constraint. AB 2011 in all cases requires that some percentage of the units be set aside for affordable housing. That's going to be a constraint. So where we think we're going to see these bills used, if I had to guess, and this could, change as economics change, but within the next couple of years, I would say we'll probably see it used for streamlining for certain, 100% affordable housing projects may elect to use this. We already do have a lot of policies that allow those projects to happen on commercial land. I did some mapping. It doesn't look like they actually open up all that much more land based on our current policies for 100% affordable projects. So, I think we were really concerned about a huge impact on these, but as of right now, I think it's going to be pretty minor. Again, can change. I called a couple developers to ask them about it. They told me that, same thing, that no. We looked into it, it's not gonna work. So we'll see, could be wrong. We'll see where this goes. But so I'll just say right now, don't fear it, these bills. Some other ones. So as we're seeing housing projects, this is a new kind of a big one in our new world order of how we evaluate housing projects. This first bullet point is not necessarily new. This was in the law before, but AB 3194 really cranked it up and said this needs to be an extraordinary circumstance for you to make this finding. And I've highlighted the kind of keywords here. So if a project meets the city's objective standards, or objective zoning, general plan, design standards, the city cannot deny the project unless we find a specific and adverse impact on public health and safety. We can also deny it for being in violation of state or federal law. So objective is really important here. Back it used to be that you could kind of look at, you could say, well, this meets the standards, but we have this standard that says, must be consistent with neighborhood character. And I just don't think it is, right? That's not objective. Objective means it's uniform, it's verifiable by an external reference. To give you an example, like if we were to go to community doing an urban village plan and they say, hey, it's really important that everybody who builds in this plan builds Spanish style architecture. Well, that's going to be a problem because it depends on who you ask. They're going to tell you different things constitute Spanish style architecture. So that would not be objective. You could have a standard that says Spanish architecture, which is defined as, a roof of a slope of this much and this percentage of red tile roof and these 5 types of cladding materials. And, so where standards kind of don't meet that really specific objective threshold, we can't use those to deny a project. And then moving forward, we just have to put a lot more work in creating standards because you can't rely on, should be compatible, should step down in height towards the neighborhood to be compatible. None of that. You have to put numbers and either they meet them or you don't. So it takes a lot of the creativity out of our jobs. It's kind of fun going back and forth with developers. Now it's, does it meet it, does it not? Check the box. The other thing I highlighted is specific adverse. So it really does need to be specific. It can't be in general when projects are built this way, they can cause problems. That's not going to fly. We would have to show this project built this way and this scenario will cause a problem that we can show. We have to show that that problem is causing us adverse and it cannot be mitigated. So this is all to say it's an extremely high bar to meet. If the project meets the objective standards effectively, it is extremely difficult to be able to deny it for any reason if it meets those objective standards. Another one that kind of hit us is must apply zoning standards to facilitate and accommodate density allowed by the general plan. Kind of the philosophy we had taken with our general plan in general was, hey, this is forward thinking. We're going to go pretty high on the densities and we'll just have a lot of standards that kind of chip away at that, right? A good example, 5 Wounds Urban Village Plan. We allow, in theory, really high density housing near right around the church. 5 Wounds Church, but we have really strict height standards that we even in the plan acknowledge means that chances are you won't be able to get to that density using our height. So the height's going to limit it. Well, can't do that anymore. We say you can build 100 units to acre. We have to let the standards let you build that. So that's kind of a change for us. Again, especially moving forward, we got to be very, very careful with that when we're applying densities and plans. It's kind of put your money where your mouth is, right? If you tell them they can build it, you have to own that. Another one we've seen just enhanced little bits here and there through a number of bills over the last few years is the density bonus. So if you see projects and you're like, well, don't you have design standards that say they can't do this? Well, if it's an affordable housing project, chances are they use the density bonus to get out of those standards. So generally how it works is projects that include at least 20% affordable units may request additional density for the reasons I just said. We don't tend to get those requests, but they also can request concessions, meaning they don't have to do something if it reduces the cost of their project to not do it. And they can request waivers to development standards. So if they say, hey, I can't build the project at the density I want that you allow using your development standards, I don't want a waiver from that. Waivers, it's defined really broadly, development standards. Pretty much anything you might ask a developer to do or build, it could be considered a development standard. Waivers are unlimited, so and we can only deny them if they same reasons, right? If we find a specific adverse health and safety impact. So common ones we'll get, what I'll say is density bonus tends to only be used, we only see 100% affordable developments. We don't tend to get those mixed income developments. So we see this used a lot, 100% affordable. They tend to ask for reductions in the open space requirement. I've seen reductions in step backs. So like where we say step the building back as you get towards, you know, the single family homes or something like that. We'll see waivers for that. Height, that's a pretty common one. Say more and more the developers are getting bolder and bolder about what they ask for. Someone wanted to get out of the stormwater control requirements and we got to deny that one. That was rare one. We get to say no, that actually stems out of state and federal law to keep our waterways clean, actually. So no, you cannot violate that.
Sorry, can you repeat what you said? They tried to get out of what?
Stormwater control requirements.
Oh, okay.
We require everyone to like clean and treat the stormwater before it leaves so it doesn't, you know, we don't have dirty stuff going right into the creeks. And they were like, well, that's expensive. We're like, yeah, but you got to do it. Yeah. So, but that one, that surprised me they even asked that. I'm getting more and more. So every time I see it, I'm like, wow, they're really pushing it. I think someone asked for like to get out of park fees, I want to say. I think we said that's not a standard, that's a gift of business. So it's not something you have to build. I think that's where that one landed. They're getting bolder and bolder. And then the presumption is really on us to, you know, when it's like, no, we have to show why. And I'll tell you, when you go to HCD, Housing and Community Development Department, for like an opinion on who's right, they don't tend to side with us. I'll tell you that. So yeah, so as you see projects come through, particularly if they're affordable, yeah, and they don't meet standards, you know, some it was the density bonus. You know, feel free to ask in the permit what they all ask for and requested. It's all public.
Just really quickly, Martina, can you define affordable housing for everyone?
Yeah, so you know what, it does vary from bill to bill, but generally most of them use the same standard, which is affordable to lower income households. So that's people making 80% of the area median income. And then there's a formula that you use that area median income to calculate rents or ownership, like payments for if you were to buy it. And so they have to restrict it to those levels. So you would look at that and say, okay, that means that the rent for this can be no more than XYZ percentage. Again, some of the bills will define it a little bit, you know, they'll say actually it has to be this area median income or lower, higher. Sometimes they'll have, okay, fine, if it's 5% extremely low income, so that's even lower income levels, you can do that instead of the 20%. So, but generally it means that they're restricting the units to rents that are affordable to people making certain incomes. Did that answer it? Yeah, I'm gonna take that as yeah. Okay. So SB 330, that one did a lot. That one did a lot. That one introduced, it really ramped up the Housing Accountability Act, the Permanent Streamlining Act, and introduced the Housing Crisis Act of 2019. SB 330 does in theory expire. I don't remember when because they've extended it. And frankly, I would be surprised if they don't just extend it into perpetuity or make it permanent. So while it does have an expiration, kind of we're operating on the assumption this is our new world order until proven otherwise. So this first one can be a challenge for us for sure, especially when we're adopting new plans and policies. This one doesn't so much affect project review, but it's when we're looking at policies and plans. We can't downzone, so we cannot change the density or intensity allowed on a site that allows housing below what it was as of January 1st, 2018, unless we comparably up the intensity or density somewhere else at the same time. So pretty straightforward. Someone says, I want to rezone this property from housing to industrial. Well, that's actually a downzoning under SB 330. So we would need to find another property to rezone to housing from something else to make up that capacity to be able to do that. Whereas extra fun for us is the new development standards can be considered a downzoning. So if we wanted to, if we said, hey, you know what, that open space standard we have isn't working, there really needs to be more open space in these developments. We've seen it, it's just not enough. Well, that would be actually, that's specifically called out and as an example in SB 330 of a downzoning. So if we were to say, I'm just talking speculatively, right? This is not a real example, it's just speculative, right? You know, just examples for example's sake. Like if we were to say up the open space requirement, double how many balconies they need to have, we would have to do something else at the same time, like show that, okay, then we're allowing 3 more stories in height to make up for that loss of units that the balconies would cause, right? So it just causes a lot more challenges for us. And if you, if you go to council and say, well, you need to get rid of that standard and up it, just be aware that this is a constraint that we're under. It's not as simple as just changing it. In a lot of cases, we'll have to find something else to change the other direction at the same time to conform with this provision. This next one, I might skip this next one because it hasn't affected us very much. It's not a tool we've used to do moratoriums or restrictions. I know Morgan Hill did. I actually think this might have been written around Morgan Hill, to be honest with you. That was a tool they used. They would get amenities out of developers by just restricting how many building permits a year they issued. And if you wanted the building permits, you needed to provide extra parkland or affordable units or whatever. Anyways, it's not a tool we've used, but we do need to be careful. There are things that can be construed as a cap. So like you couldn't adopt an urban village plan and say up to 500 units, even if the individual land uses would allow more. If everyone builds the max density, there could be 800 units. We can't then say, but there's only gonna be 600 total. Whoever gets the 600 first wins. That would be in violation of that. Again, not a tool we've really used, but something we just have to keep our eye on. Ministerial approval, I know that's a big one here, right? Why has this project popped up and there wasn't a public hearing and I didn't go to the planning commission or the director's hearing, there was no chance to appeal and there was no CEQA review. Yeah, that's been very popular. Sacramento has found that to be quite popular and successful. And so it's a tool that I expect that will continue to see be introduced through legislation. So generally speaking, how that works is where projects meet both the standards of the bill, most of them will have some specific standards built into the bill, as well as the city's standards that the city must review and approve the project within specified timeframes. We cannot take it through a public hearing where there's any sort of a discretionary decision on it. As I said earlier, we can only deny these projects, same thing, this language will be in here for violation of state or federal law, or if they cause specific adverse impacts on health and safety, and those cannot be mitigated. I highlighted not subject to environmental review because my opinion is I think this is one of the reasons that Sacramento has found these to be a really popular option. CEQA has kind of become a beast. It's very easy to challenge or litigate CEQA decisions, analysis, action. And people definitely use it for various purposes that may or may not be driven by how much they care about the environment. it does need reform. I think you'll be hard pressed to find a person who says, there needs to be some changes. This is not working. But does anyone want to be the legislator whose name is attached to undermining California's landmark environmental laws? No, right? That's a tall order. And I don't even know how you'd reform it without losing really important things. But if you create ministerial processes, guess what? These projects get out of CEQA and you don't have to kind of be upfront that I'm the CEQA reformer, right? So I think that's a lot of what's driving these. It's not to say that they're not subject to anything, right? There is that health and safety. We can deny them for health and safety. So those are things we will look at. Where they include affordable housing, if there's federal funding attached, a lot of times we still have to do environmental review under NEPA, which is the comparable law. So that's been kind of an interesting one, and the state has not been able to change the federal law on that. So these projects are still subject to that. But yeah, I think that CEQA streamlining is a huge reason we're seeing more and more of these. ADUs, right? That's an example of streamlining. There's all kinds of ones. AB 2011, right? That's a new one. SB 35 I'll talk about because that's probably the one we see used the most that you all may be concerned about. The way SB 35 works is every year the state does have to look at our housing production numbers and make a determination on what percentage of affordable units would have to be included in these projects to use the bill. Since it was introduced, and we don't think we see a change to this coming, it's been required that projects include at least 50% low income units. So there isn't a market for half affordable, half market rate projects. No one's building that, right? So we've effectively only seen it be used for 100% affordable developments. As I mentioned earlier, they've got to meet the standards. The exceptions are SB 6 has extended it to commercial land, so that does it conform to the zoning in the sense that does the zoning allow residential use? It doesn't have to if it meets SB 6's rules. And then also projects may combine the density bonus in SB 35. So, while we may have a height standard that says 30 feet, if they used a density bonus concession or waiver to go above that, that's still considered in conformance for purpose of this bill. And so the project is still moving forward. SB 35, I mentioned a lot of these bills have some specific criteria. I pulled out some of them from this one. You can't demolish historic resource, for example. You can't be on a lot of sensitive land, farmland, habitat land. Can't demolish units occupied by renters. And then interestingly, this one triggers a tribal referral. They actually have to do a tribal referral before they submit to us, and the tribe can say this project could have an impact, so you can't use SB 35. They haven't done that yet. They've always said this is fine because they tend to be in urban areas. So, but the tribes actually do have a lot of power to kick someone out of this process, interestingly. And that was added in later, and that was actually quite controversial. What I will say about this one is that I talked to the staff who does these applications, and anyone can only remember one developer who refused to do any outreach. Every single other one has held a community meeting, just like we would normally require. They typically invite us to the meeting. Staff will be there. If they invite us, we're happy to be there, answer questions and whatnot. I think what's a little bit different is that the result of this isn't going to be a public hearing that you can then go make your case to the council member or the planning commission about. But I will say a lot of the developers really are willing to listen to feedback. An example, Fourth and Younger, there was a project that they actually did some redesign after the community meeting because they heard really strongly from the community certain things and they could accommodate that redesign. So it's not to say that developers are completely thumbing, like I don't care. Most of them really are still doing some outreach, and there actually is a pending bill that would require a community meeting in certain instances for these projects. So we'll see where that goes. Definitely there's some appetite in Sacramento to start adding the community back a little bit into this process. So that's to be determined. We'll see where that goes. A big one SB 330 also did is this idea that we can't move the goalposts on projects, that cities would hear a project is coming in and just immediately adopt standards to make sure that project can never happen, or adopt standards, halfway through and say, well, you're subject to the new ones. So a really big thing SB 330 did was create this new preliminary review process where a developer has to give us some pretty basic information on their project. I think they'll give us a site plan, a grading plan, a unit count, a handful of other things. Once they give us that submittal, that locks in their development standards, fees, all of that, building code standards, as far as I'm aware, through the life of the project. So there are some timelines they have to meet. They actually do have to get their formal application in within 180 days of this preliminary review. But it is a really interesting tool, an important tool for them, because, you know, in theory, by the time you add it up, I think they could be at, like, say, the building permit stage 3 years later, and we would actually have to charge them the fees from 3 years ago and the building code from 3 years ago. So if nothing else, my bureaucrat self thinks tracking nightmare. But yeah, it's an interesting one. So essentially, you know, a developer can kind of throw us this application, and even if we adopt a new policy in the interim, or if they know this urban village plan is coming, usually those are helpful to developers, or something's coming, they can get in an SB 330 application before this new policy is adopted and lock in that they don't have to deal with that. Yeah, fun. Another thing, we just really ramped up the laws around the city has to provide an application checklist, and we cannot ask for any information that's not on our checklist. So if you come and say, oh, you know, you got to ask them to do all these other studies, and then we need more elevations, and we need a 3D rendering. If that wasn't on our checklist, technically they don't have to give it to us. Developers, you know, I mean, they're not totally unreasonable, you know, for real. And so if it's reasonable ask, you know, I don't think we've had any problems being like, ooh, can you do this? But, you know, just be aware, right? We may not be able to accommodate everything we want to get, because the developer can say, no, you know, I don't care that this is a unique circumstance, wasn't on your checklist, I don't need to provide it to you. It also sets timeframes for when the city has to identify inconsistency with development standards after we deem the project the, you know, submittal complete. So we've gotten everything we needed from our checklist. I want to say, I shouldn't even say it off the top of my head, because it does vary in the project size, but like 60 to 90 days, something like that, we have to do the full analysis. And if we miss something, and this is us, this is the Public Works Department, this is everybody, if we miss something, it doesn't matter if we miss it and we didn't catch it within the time frame, it has to be deemed consistent. So if a planner makes a mistake and didn't catch that the building is 1 story too tall in the time frame, then it is deemed consistent with the zoning, even if it's not. So it just puts a lot more pressure on us, right? Get it right. And it's a lot more stress on staff, and just in general, it's taking a lot longer to do stuff in a way because of some of this. Another one, you can't kind of at the last minute be like, oh, that might be historic. You got to identify that pretty much up front. I think it's within 30 days of that application being complete, interestingly. So, you know, historic preservation is definitely in the radar of some of this legislation, because it's seen as a barrier to housing production. Which, as the former historic preservation officer, especially, that just gives me, just hurts my heart. But they definitely want us to have more predictable and shorter review timelines. A big one for us was that as a charter city, we never had to align our zoning and our general plan. And this is one I actually agree with. We should have done this, and I'm not sad Sacramento forced us to do it. But we've got to keep our zoning and our general plan have to be in alignment. So if we say there's a general plan designation that allows housing on this site, the zoning has to match that. Which meant we are in the middle of rezoning about 12,000 properties. And we have to contend with the SB 330 upzoning, downzoning, and we do that as well, right? So that's been fun. We've got about 5,000 left to do. You may have gotten notices. If you get a hearing notice, it'll be in an envelope. It'll have some FAQs. It'll explain what's going on. So it's possible you've gotten them. I've gotten notices for this to my house. And similarly, if we haven't gotten to that yet and it's inconsistent, we can't require the housing project to rezone if it meets the general plan's objective standards. We can still apply zoning standards, but only to where they facilitate that development we allow. We also can't subject a project to more than 5 public hearings. Now for San Jose, that hasn't been an issue. I calculated it when this was first proposed. And generally, you know, in an extraordinary circumstance, the most I could get to was 4. If you were to say, I don't know, try to demolish the city landmark as part of your housing project, you'd have 2 landmark commission meetings and then potentially a council and a planning commission hearing. So hasn't been a huge issue, but like be aware a continued hearing counts. So this couldn't go to planning commission and be continued several times in addition to a landmarks commission referral, for example. We do have to keep our eye on that. Hasn't been an issue yet, but you know, more rules on us. It also shortens SB 330, shorten the time frame we have to act on a project after CEQA is done. For us, again, not so much of an issue because we tend to be ready to go hearing when the CEQA is done. That's the last thing we have finished, but definitely, you know, again, need to keep our eye on it. You can't dawdle. If you don't act in these timeframes, the project is deemed approved. Finally, oversight and consequences, my least favorite of all of them. I don't remember exactly. I think it was SB 330 that specified that housing law, these laws I'm talking about, violations now can be referred to the Attorney General, and it's deemed the Attorney General's job to investigate them. We haven't had the Attorney General step in on anything yet, but like the city of San Francisco, which is considered a bad actor, I'll tell you, in a lot of ways, is under a special investigation by the Attorney General for their housing approval process practices. Yeah, so that's new. The laws also have expanded who can.
Well, it could have been that person who accepted $300,000 in bribes. That was.
Yeah, I mean, we are not San Francisco. That's all I'll say.
That's right.
We are not. I am not worried about the Attorney General opening an investigation on us. I'll just share, like, every few years, San Francisco would reach out and be like, "Don't you little planners in Lily San Jose want to visit us and learn how real planning's done?" And we say, "Okay, yeah, that'd be fun. We'll go to San Francisco and meet with the planners up there." And we would ask them questions like, "Hey, so how are you guys meeting the Permit Streamlining Act even before all these laws?" And I'll never forget this. What they told us is they said, "Well, we're San Francisco, so we don't have to follow those laws because either you want to develop here or not, and no one's going to call us out on this." Not anymore. So anyways, it expanded who can sue. So like any prospective tenant of a housing project now has grounds to sue us for violating these laws. So if I were like, "Hey, you denied this apartment building and I wanted to live there," I have grounds to sue the city of San Jose over that now. Hasn't happened, but really interesting. I think that was to really help, you know, like the Cal Yigby, really to give them a foot in to start suing cities. And then housing elements. This could be a whole nother conversation, but so I guess I'll back up. So every 8 years, it goes by regions. Each region is required to update our housing element. There's a number of requirements we have to do. The biggest one is that we get a growth allocation called a RENA number. And we have to show that our policies, our zoning, and we have the sites available to allow people to build that amount of housing that we're required to show. So the state has really ramped up what that means. Just a lot more analysis we have to do, particularly around furthering fair housing, a lot more scrutiny on our analysis, a lot more requirements for putting sites on our inventory, saying, yeah, these are housing element inventory sites. We're counting them as being able to build like 30 units toward that total we have to do. A lot more scrutiny on that. The one that affected us deeply was after all the Bay Area cities had kind of started their housing element process, at least got through kind of planning a timeline, getting consultants and all that on board. Sacramento had the wisdom to say, hey, this needs more review. It needs a longer public review period for housing elements, and it needs longer review period by us partway through. And so they added, I want to say a 45-day public review, and don't quote me on this, I think a 90-day, we had to send it to them and give them like 90 days to review it midway. And what that did was us and a lot of Bay Area cities that really threw our timelines off, because we had planned a timeline that did not include all of that extra mandatory review time where we just had to kind of sit on it and leave the comments, right? And we actually approached some legislators to say, hey, that's kind of not fair to us Bay Area cities to do that to us halfway, like talk about not moving goalposts, right? And, you know, can we talk about maybe legislation to have that not apply to the Bay Area because we didn't have time to plan for that? And that, no interest there. So that means our housing element was late. It was due to be done and submitted to the state by January 31st of 2023. We got it done June 20th of 2023. And what did that do? That left us open to the builder's remedy. So builder's remedy is not a new law, but it was forgotten. Somebody looked it up and said, hey, wait a minute, does everyone know this is on the books? As far as everyone knows, it had only been used one time before in like 1992. Someone tried to build a house without a garage in the city of Albany using this law and was denied. But it's kind of come up as it's like the bear came out of hibernation or something with this one. And what it's saying is that where the city does not have a substantially compliant housing element by the deadline, developers can build housing anywhere regardless of the zoning or general plan designation. They are not subject to your zoning or your general plan. Anywhere, anything's open. Projects do need to include some affordable housing. That's one requirement, but there's not a lot of other requirements around the builder's remedy. It's an interesting one because, like I said, there's not a lot in the law, so there's a lot of questions to be answered. There's not case law, there's not anything we can all look to. So all of the jurisdictions who have these projects are trying to figure it out, as are the applicants. Interesting arguments. So we had applicants, for example, are arguing that these projects should not be subject to any sort of permitting short of a building permit, so that they should just be able to go straight to the building department and submit their building permit and start construction. Our position is that they do require a development permit, that the law does not exempt them from CEQA. It does not. So these projects are being required to go through a development permit process. So where you do see them, you will see that development permit process, I guess, unless someone sues us and the court says no. But that's our position. We have 16 applications. Most of them are actually that SB 330 prelim I talked about. So what developers did is they said, wait a minute, I'm not ready to actually submit my application right now during your builder's remedy window. So between January 31st and June 20th. But I am ready to give you a site plan and some other basic information. That's an SB 330 prelim. I'm going to lock in the fact that builder's remedy applies and you don't have zoning or general plan standards to hold me to. So most applications are that right now. They're that prelim and they have 180 days to come in with their formal development application. So that Franquette one right now is that SB 330 prelim. We haven't received the formal application for that one. What we have received for a formal application is 1170 Pedro, which is where the Almaden swim, or not Almaden, sorry, so San Jose Swim and Racket Club is. We had previously had a general plan amendment on that site to convert it from private recreation to kind of lower density and medium density housing to build townhomes. We had said, hey, that is inconsistent. That general plan amendment is inconsistent with a number of our policies. And they said, well, guess what? Builder's remedy. So here I am. So we're getting that project in through the builder's remedy instead of through the general plan amendment that they had started with. We do also have the SB 330 prelim for 1016 to 1030 Lincoln, 22 units there. And then 940 Willow, a mixed use project with 126 units. We also have that one.
And Martina, that one's 7 stories on a 2-lane street adjacent to single family.
Yeah, that sounds right. I haven't seen it myself, but that sounds right from what I understand. It does have 4
and Martina, and Martina, in non-Willow Glen, I think, typically in North San Jose, the city's always wants, if you're going to do housing somewhere, you really want it to be high density.
Yeah.
And I think one builder's remedy permit was to take an industrial parcel and build townhouses.
Yep. Yeah, so that's a fun one. I was going to talk about that one because I think this is a really good example of unintended consequences, Sacramento. So that project, it is in our transit employment residential overlay. So they are allowed to build housing on that site. It has to meet 75 units to the acre. So pretty high density. And the developer had a project where they were doing a really high density building and some townhomes. I actually know that developer. They shared with me the townhomes were the only profitable part of that project, so that they thought they could make it work. If the townhomes made the profit, that essentially subsidized the apartment building. And then they recalculated and they said that doesn't even work anymore. But guess what? The builder's remedy would allow us to just do the townhomes and not do the high density housing. So we have an application for townhomes on land that we otherwise would require 75 units to the acre projects. So it's one of those where it's like, is this really what you wanted, right? What people are doing is they're using it to come in under the density on the land that you could build housing on at higher density. Yeah. All right, I think Natalie had her hand up. You got a question? Well, Natalie, hand question. All right, Scott, do you have a question for me on this one? Anybody? I see hands. I'm not hearing anybody. Do I have to like unmute people?
Oh, hey, Martina, is that the last slide?
Yeah, almost. Yeah. So
Okay.
just in summary, and then we can do it to full Q&A. And I can talk for hours about this stuff, so just cut me off. I don't know how long we have tonight, but this is almost the second to last slide. So just in general, remember, housing developments can only be held to objective standards. Where we have older standards that are not objective, we can't, we ask, we say, hey, can you do this? But developers can say, no, I don't need to. Development standards are always into everything here is going to be interpreted in favor of the developer. Particularly you go to the state, they're not going to side with us. It's very, very, very rare. Just in general, we have a lot stricter and shorter review timelines, and the consequences if we don't meet them is the project is approved, whether or not it meets anything or not. And just a lot more ministerial approval and just a lot more scrutiny in general from the state. What we're doing moving forward is any new policy document, anything we adopt is going to have objective standards. So all our urban villages moving forward. A good example was our citywide design standards and guidelines. The timing thankfully worked out quite well for that. Because we were getting ready to completely revamp our design guidelines right around when a lot of this legislation hit. So we did it in a way where our standards are objective. So that's great. And that's a really powerful tool we have to kind of shape the form of development we have in our city. Where we can, we're revising documents. We've gone through and just updated our submittal requirements, really made sure we're asking for everything, kind of try to tighten all of that up. We're rezoning properties. We definitely continue to work with developers to streamline applications to provide community outreach and try to get them to address it as much as we can. And then big part of my job, my colleagues' jobs is continuing to work with Sacramento to what I'll say is this is we don't come in, we don't tend to oppose bills because that's just not going to be a winning strategy. And all that will do is get us on the bad list with Cupertino, right? We'll be the bad kid too. Our approach really is, I guess, for lack of a better term, kind of borrow a term, is harm reduction in a way. It's, hey, look, like I get you're going to do this, but did you think about this, and this? That's really going to cause challenges and violate some of our core policies we have. So that's really our approach to working with Sacramento. We're sometimes successful, sometimes not. We do have a good relationship with some of the offices, so there's lots of parts of state legislation I can point to that's in there. I told them to put it in there, so that's been nice. All right, so that's my spiel. I'm going to stop sharing.
Well, thanks, Martina. That's a very good presentation. I think, like you said, you can build on and present to other concerned associations. It does seem, though, from when you started your planning career to now, it's quite different, the rules that cities operate. So thanks for showcasing that. I know Helen on our board had a question. Helen? Maybe she's delayed. Was there another question from the board members? Mitch?
Hi, Martina. These zoning rules, I know a lot of them have to do with safety, right? Height restrictions and things like that. We were talking about those tall buildings. I mean, how do we reconcile that? I know that, brings into, do we have a fire truck that can get to 7 stories tall? Are there fire hydrants that can put out a fire like that? I know we talk a lot about traffic and impact on the neighborhood, but zoning rules are really on some level about safety, aren't they? I mean, I know there's also, but you don't want to live next to a factory spewing out fumes, but it's also like setbacks and things are for fire safety and earthquake and stuff like that, right?
I'd say, you know, zoning standards tend to be less directly safety related. And you can engineer all kinds of things to be fire safe. So everything is subject to the building and fire codes. And that is where it really is looks at, can a ladder reach that? Is there a hydrant close enough? Can the fire trucks don't like to back up more than like 200 feet. So they have to have a turnaround. Those rules exist. They don't tend to be in zoning, but they are there and they're not waived by the state laws. And those are good examples of one. If someone asked me for a density bonus waiver from a fire truck turnaround, the answer to that is absolutely not. So those exist, but those do tend to be, zoning tends to be more around just kind of general light and air aesthetics. You know, we don't want to live where your window is 2 feet from someone else. That's just unpleasant. You can make that safe from a fire standpoint in certain ways, but zoning tends to be more around this is unpleasant.
Okay, thank you.
And that was the attorney, of course, on the board asking that question. So very good. How about Scott, former board member?
Hi, Martina, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hey, thank you for your presentation. It's pretty long, pretty complicated. It'd be great maybe to, since most of the meat potatoes that we're interested in, maybe focusing down on 330 and builder's remedy kind of gets right to, I think, a lot of the issues that we're going to have out in the community. I wanted to ask you specifically about the kind of the end process for this. So we've got these projects that are doing builder's remedy under the 330, and this combo, it seems like there's two things that the developers have to get from the city that still gives some power to the local control, despite all of the states, greasing the skids here. So for instance, on the San Jose Swim and Racket Club, they don't have to get a tentative map. They don't have to rezone. They don't have to get the general plan process, but they still have to get CEQA and a site development permit. Is that correct?
Yes, that would be correct.
And in the CEQA, if the CEQA is denied, the applicant could appeal that, or if the CEQA is going through, the community could appeal that, and that would go to the city council.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So if the CEQA finds a significant unavoidable impact, then the council would actually be the initial decision maker on that. If not, then yeah, we're saying site development permit, it would go to director's hearing, and then someone could appeal that CEQA determination, and that would go to council.
It's my understanding that if you have a appeal at a director's hearing, it goes to planning commission.
So environmental appeals actually go to council.
Okay, so on the site development permit, if let's say that the community is going to appeal the site development permit, that would go to the planning commission. And then if the planning commission then denies the permit, the applicant could then appeal the planning commission's denial to the city council. Is that correct?
Yeah, not in San Jose. Other jurisdictions work that way. For us, it's a one appeal and you're done. Then you got to go to litigation. So if it was appealed to planning commission, they would have the final determination, and then no more appeals beyond that.
Thank you very much.
Yep. And then just keep in mind, the planning commission's bound by those same, what are our findings for denial, right? So adverse health and safety, not zoning or general plan conformance can't be a finding with builder's remedy. So, yeah.
Any other questions from the board? I know we're kind of running behind on time. Let me just go. How about Vern? Vern, you're a former board member. Vern, can you hear us?
Yeah.
Hey, Vern.
Yeah, can you guys hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Hi, just curious, July 26th, the front page of the Merck showed California population growth to slow down. And the source was the California Department of Finance. And what it showed was the 2013 forecast that projected, by 2060 would be up to 53 million roughly. And this new forecast showed that we're going to be flat basically at 40 million. So it makes me wonder, is Sacramento adjusting all of this housing accordingly? Because I mean, it looks to me like we're not going to need as much housing since our population is going to be projected to be flat by the state's own California Department of Finance.
Thanks, Vern. Yeah, great current event thing. I saw that too, about essentially no growth, population growth. Martina, any comment there?
Yeah, I don't have much to say other than I have not seen that. I mean, that's new, right? So very, very new. So no, definitely not yet have seen or heard any sort of like, wow, maybe we can pull off the gas right now. I think the other thing just to keep in mind is like we're already at a point where people cannot afford housing. So I don't know, this is my speculation. I don't know how much that would slow, at least in the near term, this desire to continue to produce housing, because we kind of have a hole to dig out of given our current prices and current homelessness levels. But yeah, we'll see. I mean, yeah, I think they'll have to look at that. So the housing element rate is every 8 years, they give us every region, the state doles out the numbers and they dole it out regionally. So I'd be interested to see if that starts getting taken into account there. But as of right now, fresh, I haven't seen anything.
Hey, thanks, Vern. Jose?
Yeah, Martina, I'm curious, when the state, I mean, it just feels like the floodgates opened when they made all these changes over the last few years. Is there any stopgap? In other words, is there any housing that once we reach a certain amount of housing statewide, then it goes back to the local control? Is there in that, or is it just open-ended?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Yes and no. So some bills definitely, like I mentioned, SB 35 annually, the state looks at people's housing production numbers and it only applies if you're not meeting the numbers. So like that's a built-in kind of stopgap on that bill. The production numbers are very, very high though. So again, we in San Jose, we just assume it's going to apply for the foreseeable future. On a bigger picture, is there like a stated goal, like once we reach this we're done? No, I wouldn't say that. I think as it becomes less of a crisis, I think the legislators would move on to something else that is in their attention. So I kind of see that as sort of our end point of, it's not, you're not hearing from constituents anymore that I can't afford housing or there's a ton of homeless people around. I think then the focus will shift onto something else. But that's just my prediction on that.
Thanks, Jose. Thanks, Martina. Helen?
Yeah, my question just for Martina, of the existing developments that we know are a result of the builder's remedy, are any of those going to be affordable housing, or is that even required?
Yeah, so they are required to set aside 20% of the units as affordable housing. So they've all indicated in their proposals that as part of builder's remedy, I am planning to do that. None of them are like 100% affordable developments. It's all market rate development that would have a certain percentage be set aside for affordable.
Okay. And my other question was, because of the city failed to meet that deadline, the state's deadline of January 31st, what kind of position does that put in the city as far as, I mean, are people who are opposed to some of these builders remedies developments, are they going to have any kind of ability for redress against the city because they didn't meet that deadline?
Yeah, I mean, I guess anyone can sue anyone. So, but is there any sort of like a process? No, I mean, we tried to meet the deadline. I can tell you that. It was not by lack of trying.
Yeah, no,
that's for sure. But yeah, no, I mean, again, I guess you could sue us and say I have damages because of this, but yeah. Is there like in the law, not that I'm aware of.
Yeah, no, I'm just wondering if that has even come up I think it's just getting, I mean, I think it's just getting started. Maybe a lot of people aren't aware of what, I think people are aware of builder's remedy, and people have mentioned it to me. And of course, we've been, we've discussed it, but I think more and more when people start getting aware, I'm just saying, it's a thought that might come up, that because of the fact that the deadline wasn't met, it kind of allowed these people to skirt around and get these developments going.
Well, it's fair to say that we're not the only city facing this situation. And it's fair to say other cities are likely going to fight the litigation on these developments that San Jose won't, because San Jose is adverse. But I think the Southern California cities are going to be taking a lot of these builders' remedies to court, but we don't know what's going to happen yet. But I know we have Natalie. You have a question?
Yeah, I do. Thank you. Thanks for hosting this tonight. So I'm actually a homeowner that's neighboring one of these development sites, the one at 940 Willow. And I've been in contact with the developer. Like you've said, these developers are not horrible human beings. Like they really amicable, educated, professional people. So I can't say that what they're doing anything with bad intentions. But I'm wondering, what is your recommendation, Martina, about moving forward with the city and the developer and developing a relationship where we can, I'm not saying get what we need out of this, but I mean, I'm literally on their construction site plan, and I don't know like what rights I have as a homeowner. And so that's one. And then two, I've heard in November there's some bill that's trying to be passed about getting local legislation put back at the local level versus all at state California level. And what is that ballot called? How do we get more educated on it so that we can actually vote for it? And if that's not true for this election, then that's okay. I'm just curious if that is true.
And Martina, I'll take that last question. Yeah, our neighborhood voices, you can find it on the internet. They're the ones that are sponsoring an initiative to potentially be on the 2024 November ballot. It'll require signature gathering. And so it's going to have to be very volunteer based, et cetera. But if it happens, we'll hear about it in the next 2 weeks of whether it's going to go forward. They tried doing it during COVID, but they couldn't get the signatures at the time. I'll hand it off to Martina.
Yeah. And then another one that, I wish I remember what city it was right now, but one of the cities in Southern California is suing over SB 9, and they are suing over the issue of home rule. And did the state properly make the findings to override local control on land use? So that's another one that it would be interesting to see where that goes, because I think that legislation does have the potential to kind of undo a lot of what I just talked about. If it say went up the courts, they may very well say, you know what, so you aren't doing what you were supposed to do. You're overreaching. And just, and frankly, I think SB 9 is a really good example. I'm kind of glad someone litigated that one. My opinion. The finding of statewide concern is not much. Okay, I gotta stop talking.
No, Martina, I just want to let you know the judge is going to rule on that in 1 month. The big problem that the judge encountered is that SB 9 has no affordable housing.
Exactly, that's what I was about to say.
It's all developer incentive, nothing affordable. So but I know there's a last question I want you to answer. Sorry. Yeah, no, that one is interesting. The finding was that we need affordable housing, but then even the study that Turner Center did said that this is going to actually just produce mostly luxury housing. So yeah, it'd be real interesting to see where that one goes. All right, so builder's remedy for projects nearby. So I'm just going to give you just really practical advice from my years of experience. Ultimately we're bound by these laws as to whether we approve or deny the project. And so I think it's up to you. Generally speaking, just coming at it with a no is probably not going to get much.
Right.
My recommendation is to really focus on the specific concerns you have. Like, for example, could you work with the developer on, like, if you're concerned about privacy, is there a compromise that you could come to with the developer? Like, look, I get it. I don't like this at all, but is there any way you cannot have the windows faces or whatever, right? I think that's how, and also with the city, really come with specifics and just try to focus on specific areas that are really the core problems that can be kind of ideally addressed. And I think you'll kind of more success doing that. And particularly if you're concerned like around like construction issues, noise, being friends with a developer is huge there, having a good relationship. There, right? Because, as you said, yeah, they're not evil people. They're people who have a job, who are trying to do their job. A lot of them are homeowners too, and they know what it's like to live near construction, etc. So, just establishing that good relationship with them and just coming at sort of a reason, not a like, no, and I'm just going to oppose everything you say, I think gets a lot more than just coming with the like, no, because they'll say, well, it's not going to be no, so I don't know what to tell you.
No, I know. I'm trying to work with this guy as well as I can. He's really actually not a bad guy. He's a good guy. So let me ask you a question. There's a project manager that is assigned to the project. I'm on the San Jose Permits website. I see the person. It's still in like an open status in terms of getting a project manager assigned. I've talked to lawyers and they said, find that project manager, become friends with them, become friends with the developer, and just keep an open line of communication. Besides that, like, is the project manager the key person in this whole thing? Or are you, or is Mr. Pierluigi? Like, I want to know who the key person is who can like help just guide this whole thing so I'm getting out of it what I want.
Yeah, so definitely on the city side, it would be that project manager. They're going to be the one working with the developer closely. They're going to be the one who knows the most about the project. They're going to be the one sending the review letters to the developer. So that's who you on the city side want to work with.
Do they have to meet with me? Like, can I make appointments with them? Like, can they?
Yeah, I mean, and we said, do we have a like literal policy? But I can't imagine if, we have neighbors who are like, hey, I want to talk to you about this. Definitely, our time is, can be constrained, right? So, I mean, are they going to be able to meet with you every week? Probably not, right? But definitely they'll be your person you call, they'll be your person you talk to. What I will say is while they are still that SB 330 prelim, because the only requirement is that they give us the information, and then once they give us the information, it's done. They have vested their rights.
Right.
At this point, not a lot, right? We're just waiting to see if this turns into a formal development application. Because we don't know, right? It may or may not. And it may come in looking a little bit differently. So we don't have that back and forth at this phase. All that function to do was just lock in, I want this development of this size in this location. So I think
the ball's still in their court to submit the next thing.
The ball's in their court to submit. Keep your eye out for that. It will get the notice of development sign, I'm sure you can check SG permits and all of that. That's really, I would say, when you want to start, start working with the developer now. And you can, if you find someone assigned to it, reach out, but honestly, they're going to say, yeah, we got it. We're waiting for at this point.
Got it. Thank you so much.
Yep.
Great. Well, I know we could probably go much longer, but I know we need to switch back to the balance.
I have a quick question. Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, Dana.
I was wondering about with Builder's Remedy and the height limitations for Willow Street. So I understand Builder's Remedy, but there's still limitations on height. All of a sudden, 7 stories in a neighborhood, no other high-rise buildings like that. So how are they bypassing the height standards?
So they are not subject to standards. We are still sending a letter saying, hey, here's our zoning standards. We really want you to conform to them. But the whole point of Builder's Remedy is they're not subject to them.
Interesting. That's crazy.
Yeah, it's very crazy. Well, it's more to discussion, Martina. We may ask you back at some point, but we know we can't expect to have you come back anytime soon because you've got a lot of busyness. But we really do appreciate you putting the presentation together and really appreciate taking everyone's questions. And we really, are very thankful. So, we've just celebrated our 50th year as a neighborhood association. So we're definitely, pay attention to land use, and then we know it matters. And thanks so much.
Yeah. And if you're friends with the other associations, let them know. This is a traveling show. I'll shrink it down and take it out to others. So as much
thank you.
As much as I have time for. All right. Well, thank you all. I'm gonna log off now.
Thank you. We appreciate your time.